Hi, I'm Dan Barker, and welcome to Free Thought Matters, produced by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of atheists and agnostics. Visit ffrf.us/join or phone 800-335-4021 to become a member or request a sample issue of our newspaper, Free Thought Today. David Steketee was the main plaintiff in FFRF's lawsuit, where we won a New Jersey Supreme Court ruling barring taxpayer funds to repair churches. Steketee spoke at our 2018 convention in San Francisco, where FFRF attorneys Patrick Elliott and Andrew Seidel were able to sit down with him for a few minutes.
David, thank you for joining us. You're a New Jersey taxpayer, and I know you've had a dispute about how your tax money is being spent. Please tell us about that.
Sure. So a portion of our taxes in New Jersey at the municipal level, our property taxes go to three sources. They go to the school district, they go to the local municipal government, and they go to the county government. A portion of those taxes going to the county government are then spent on historic preservation trust funds. In this case, a portion of that money then went to religious institutions for repair and restoration services.
So that's where your problem is with the funding of your local churches, which I take it you're not a part of?
No, I'm not. I did go to one to explain to them that I really liked the architecture. It was really hot that day. They asked if I really liked the air conditioning. I was like, no, you totally misheard me. But regardless, I think they're definitely beautiful structures, but no, I'm not an attendant at any of them, and I've been an atheist since I was 8 years old or so.
And so, I mean, what's the legal problem? I mean, what's your dispute with the county over this expenditure?
Sure. I think the New Jersey State Constitution, along with multitudes of federal case law, makes it really clear. The case law at the federal level makes it clear, but the New Jersey State Constitution says very specifically that no tax dollars or rates or tithes can be charged to individual taxpayers for the repair or restoration of churches or churches.
I mean, but that language is so clear.
It's unambiguous. Yeah, there's no question.
You can't tax somebody and then give that money to a church to build it or to repair it.
Right.
And here, Morris County was taxing you and then giving the money to churches to repair.
And not in small sums. It was by the time we were finished and got our final case decided, it was $11 million in just our one county. So it's
and you talked about the numbers, and you and I worked on this case for a long time before we kind of finally sued and got there. And you talked about the numbers at your recent speech at the FFRF convention, where we gave you the Freethinker of the Year award. Let's go ahead and take a look at that clip real fast.
In 2011, while strolling through Morristown, New Jersey, I noticed a sign in front of the Church Redeemer's Parish House, indicating it had received funds from the Morris County Historic Preservation Trust. I later discovered it was almost by accident the Morris County program was mentioned, because Morris County, unlike other grant programs used by the church, has no requirement for public posting indicating the source of funds. After doing some research, I discovered the program had already doled out over $4 million since 2003. In 2012, I filed a complaint with the FFRF, but it wasn't until 2015 that I was able to attend public meetings for our county government and argue my point of view. After grants were approved later that year, I emailed the FFRF and asked them to proceed with the lawsuit. By this point, the program had granted over $9.5 million to religious institutions. Our case was heard in late 2016, and in January 2017, the New Jersey Superior Court ruled against us. We appealed, and counsels for the county and churches requested to move the case to the New Jersey Supreme Court, bypassing the appellate court. Oral arguments were held in late 2017, and in January 2018, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled in our favor, ending a program which has cost the taxpayers over $11 million. You would think such a resounding defeat, delivered with unambiguous language from the New Jersey Supreme Court, composed of both conservative and liberal judges, would cause any government official with an eye to justice to admit defeat. But no. The Morris County freeholders, all Republican, handed their case over to the Becket Fund. You may have heard of the Becket Fund. They were behind the Hobby Lobby case. Our freeholders, summarily disinterested in my pleas to adhere to the New Jersey State Constitution, which makes clear no person shall, quote, be obliged to pay tithes, taxes, or other rates for building or repairing of any church or churches, disinterested in my pleas to adhere to the multitude of prior case law restricting the use of government funds for sectarian purposes, disinterested in the pleas not just from an atheist liberal like myself, but from church-going conservatives as well, will now allow a right-wing legal group to use the case to erode the wall of separation of church and state under the guise of religious freedom. It is remarkable to think government officials, for whom there was no more basic expectation than to follow the law, would not be persuaded by rational discussion, analysis, and facts. I cite a Committee for Public Education v. Nyquist and an Office of Legal Counsel opinion from 1995, specifically on historic preservation grants. I explained the issues with the later 2003 OLC opinion upon which the Freeholders Council heavily relied in his opinion on the constitutionality of the program. I explained the distinction between Trinity's case and Morris County's activities, all to no avail. What struck me is these politicians don't care about what's right. They care about what's good. It's easy to sell something that appears good. It's easy to get votes talking about all the good they do for the community. It's easy to convince people to ignore what's right on the promise of doing something good. The challenge, of course, is what's good is more subjective than what's right, and people ascribe different value to being right or being good. In the best of times, we can be both. In the context of our case against Morris County, I suspect we were right, but not necessarily good, and that makes this case especially challenging. On a half-mile walk through Morristown, New Jersey, where our case originated, you'll pass 5 historic church buildings. St. Peter's Episcopal, whose reverend happens to be Matthew Broderick's sister, the Presbyterian Church of Morristown, which has 2 separate buildings, the Church of the Redeemer, which also runs a soup kitchen at which I've volunteered, and the United Methodist Church. These churches are no doubt magnificent historic structures, representing architecture worthy of preservation. So I would argue their preservation is good for the community. And that's the simple argument our freeholders made in support of spending over $4 million on their preservation. That's the argument which reasonably appealed to the community. That's the argument which frankly makes it difficult to argue for what's right, because what's good is visible to everyone, and what's right doesn't really impact anyone. Because in this case, nobody's taxes are actually reduced as a result of doing what's right. The impact of doing what's right is often less visible than doing what's good.
So in just the local churches that I was aware of, there was $4 million spent just on those 4 or 5 churches in Morristown, where I lived at the time. Throughout the county, there was upwards of there was over $4 million by the time I recognized the problem. There was $9.5 million by the time we filed the suit. It was $11 million by the time we finalized the case and got a judgment in our favor at the New Jersey Supreme Court. It was it's a large amount of money, and more money than I think anybody that was even remotely familiar with the expenditure knew about.
And this is just your county.
Right.
There are 20-some counties in New Jersey, and we can assume they're all probably doing about that. We're talking maybe $100 million plus some years.
It's a substantial amount of money. I mean, the northern parts of the state tend to be more historic than the southern parts of the state, so there's probably some diversity there, but you have state-run programs as well that cover the entire state. And these date back to '82 and '83 when the first grants were directly provided by the state legislature.
And so it seems that the principle involved, it sounds like you're supportive in general of historic preservation, but with respect to religious institutions, that they should support themselves. So if individuals in the community want their churches to be repaired, whether it's stained glass windows or the roofs, that they should raise this money on their own and not rely upon a general county taxpayer funding. I mean, is that what the outcome that you're ultimately seeking in this case?
Absolutely. I think that the buildings themselves, the churches, the institutions, deserve preservation. They have value to large numbers of individuals in the community. They're beautiful buildings in their own right.
What Patrick's bringing up is, you must hate churches. How can you want to tear them down? You want them all to decay. And you're saying, no, that's not the case. But did you get blowback in the community for making this stand? You were very public about it. You were on the news a couple times. Did you get flack from your community?
I did and I didn't. I mean, probably the most interesting experience was when I was getting my haircut. I had, the barbers drape around my neck. The guy has his shears out. He looks at me in the mirror and says, "Hey, you're that guy from the newspaper." And I was like, crap, I don't know where this is going. And I just said, yes. And he said, "I totally support you." He was from a local church. He said, when we wanted to expand our facility, we paid for it ourselves. These churches, and hadn't lasted for hundreds of years on their own. They were maintained by their parishioners. If it's important to parishioners to maintain their facilities, then yes, they should be maintaining them on their own. Some of them have $1 million, budgets on an annual basis. I did have one friend that spoke to me after, 2 months of not talking to me and finally reached out and took me out for a cup of coffee and said, I think you're doing, bad things to people who are just trying to do good. And I said, well, no, it's really about the law. I don't know if you've read the New Jersey Constitution. Here's a copy. This is what the issue is, and he just wouldn't have any of it. So it's, I no longer talked to him. And
so you lost a friend over it.
Yeah, I lost someone I thought was a good friend at the time, but clearly not. I mean, what kind of friend breaks up with someone over something that's so legalistic and we should be able to have differences among our friends. And
you're taking a stand to uphold the Constitution. You'd hope to get
it's kind of an important thing for a multitude of reasons. Yeah.
And so if we can go back in time a little bit, we know, because we've been working with you for a number of years, that this has taken a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, so how did this start out?
You first came to us in 2012?
2011 is when I noticed it. In 2012, I had searched back through my emails, and that was the first email response that I had from the FFRF. And yeah, it's been a long time coming. And what I really laid out in the beginning is I wanted to go and talk to our county government officials and explain what I felt the problem was. I didn't want to just blindside them with a lawsuit. I didn't want to blindside them with a letter from the FFRF or any other organization. And so I went, and that took time to gather an understanding of what was going on, the history of the program, to be able to present, a cogent argument. So it wasn't until 2015 that I went on the day when they were actually approving the final rounds of grants for that year, and they approved them, and I emailed Stephanie and said, let's go ahead and file.
Yeah, you worked a lot on your own on this as well, and then we had a ton of internal memos flying back and forth on our end talking about this as a possible lawsuit. So we filed in 2015, and the judge wasn't really friendly to our position. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, not at all. Judge Goodsite, I mean, not just the fact of demanding that we list the churches and name the churches in the actual case as being somewhat problematic, both from my own personal perspective of getting more flack from the community, which thankfully they didn't, and I explained to a multitude of people that we were required to. This wasn't just a choice of ours to list them.
But that is very interesting. The judge said any of the churches that are getting grants, you have to sue them as well. You can't just be suing the county.
Yeah, which I found completely bizarre. I understand some of the logic behind it, but not entirely. I mean, they weren't at fault in this. They were just taking advantage of a program that government officials said, yes, you can take advantage of. So I found no fault in the church's behavior overall. I mean, it was what it was. But yeah, the questioning, and I was actually there at orals for that. And it was interesting that she was, kind of openly hostile to our point of view, which I've since learned is not necessarily indicative of someone's point of view, as we found out in the New Jersey Supreme Court. But at the same time, she didn't really push back a lot against the churches in the county, at all, which was pretty interesting to watch.
But the decision really reflected that I don't know if it's bias really is a fair word or not, but it reflected it's certainly what she was showing at oral argument.
Yeah, it was unsurprising that we lost in the Superior Court. When I read I read the decision and I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's not quite right. That's kind of misinterpreted. It was really surprising that it was that off.
And so you said you've lost. You're Freethinker of the Year this year, so obviously that's not the final outcome. What happened, after that loss? How did the case proceed from there?
Sure. So if I recall correctly, they had appealed at one point to the New Jersey District Court, the Federal District Court.
Yeah, that was before.
That was before. Okay.
That was before, yeah.
So they had appealed at one point to the District Court. That got sent back down. We requested to take it to the Appellate Court, so we were appealing the case. There was a similar case, though not identical, dealing with similar legal issues from the ACLU, and that was also brought up, and they wanted to hear both cases at the same time because they were similar. So there was a request to bring it directly to the New Jersey Supreme Court, which I think we objected to, and then it went to the New Jersey Supreme Court anyway, and obviously things turned out in our favor because we won unanimously, which was honestly surprising.
So it's you versus the county, and then how many churches?
12, I think, were named in the...
12 churches. So, there's quite a lot of forces working against you. And the fact that the New Jersey Supreme Court ultimately wanted to take the case, even though there were other options potentially for the case to work itself out. So I don't know, were you pessimistic at that point in time, coming off of the loss and not knowing what they would do?
Yeah, it's frustrating because once first I went to the freeholders and then they opened their meeting with a religious prayer, and my first thought is like, where is this going to go? And then we lose in Superior Court. And I thought it was in a fairly liberal state, like what's going on here? And then we go to the New Jersey Supreme Court, and you're listening to questions from the from everyone, and it's tough to listen to those questions because they're asking great questions, but it's like, why are they asking so many questions to us? Like, we have the stronger case here. We have the better arguments. We have the one that's actually based on law. And so it was challenging. And I came out of that and I was like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know if this is going to be a 3-4 against or a 4-3-4. And then when I saw the decision, I did a double take, and I went back and I Wikipedia'd the court composition. I was like, oh, there's only 7 there, and there's 7 on the decision. So, yeah, that's unanimous, right? It's totally surprising. Opinion. Totally surprising to me.
I mean, it's a really great opinion. It's a very strong opinion, and it's based in, as you just said, the law. The law and the language is so clear. It was actually a hard case to argue sometimes because we're like, well, the law says this, and he says you can't do this, and you're doing this, so just stop.
What don't you get here? Yeah.
It was hard. It
was a really great case. It hit on a lot of really key points from our argumentation, which I thought was great, and hopefully will provided it doesn't go to the Supreme Court, it will provide a very sound precedent for other states, hopefully, to follow.
And we're going to talk about the Supreme Court a little bit when we come back. We're also going to talk about the religious freedom issues and arguments at play in this case when we come back after the break with Free Thought Matters.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
We're back with Free Thought Matters. I'm Andrew Seidel, FFRF's Director of Strategic Response, with Patrick Elliott, our Senior Legal Counsel, and we are talking with David Steketee, Freethinker of the Year. And you are the Freethinker of the Year because you successfully litigated a case against the county and against all these churches, 7-0 before the New Jersey Supreme Court. And it's really, the fascinating argument in this case for me was religious freedom. We're seeing in this day and age this attempt to redefine religious freedom as a way for churches and religious groups and believers to either impose their religion on others or get access to the government machinery and funds in the way they've never had in the past. And that's exactly what was happening in this case. But really, we argued that you were the one who had the religious freedom right that was being violated. And I think the New Jersey Supreme Court agreed with us on that.
Yeah, pretty clearly. I think that the challenge is that the religious freedom that we express and the liberty that we seek as plaintiffs in this case is freedom from religion. I mean, literally. It's the ability to not fund an organization that you don't believe in. And that's the entire intent behind the New Jersey State Constitution's Article 1, Section 3 clause that allows us to do this.
The no aid clause.
The no aid clause. And it's not just about, atheists. It's about anyone of any religious persuasion and their ability to be secure in their own religious thought and not having to have the lingering concern that they are funding religious beliefs that they might not adhere to, be that, Protestants funding Catholic churches or Catholics funding Protestant churches or Muslims funding, Jewish temples or what have you. It really covers the totality of society. And given the fact that in New Jersey, Catholics didn't even have, or Jews for that matter, didn't even have the same rights as Protestants in the early days of the nation, it's kind of surprising that they're, at least in our local government, they were so cool with the idea of providing tax dollars for funding churches that they years ago would have been discriminated against.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that protection is in the Constitution of New Jersey that's so old. This was one of the fundamental evils that the founders sought to protect against. We don't want the coercive taxing power of our government used to fund the building and repair of churches or mosques, as you said, or temples. That is one of the fundamental violations of the rights of conscience and religious liberty. And it was so nice to see the New Jersey Supreme Court pick up on that.
It also to me struck me as part of this case involves entanglement. The idea that, and maybe you can comment on this, that the churches are filling out detailed applications, and one of the things they're agreeing to is let the public to have access. Mm-hmm. And they were asking for very religious items sometimes, either repair of certain stained glass windows that had religious imagery. And so it's an uncomfortable thing to say, but that the government shouldn't really be deciding, funding stained glass windows for a particular church or making sure that the church is open to the public. That's not something the government should really have an interest in doing. That's something churches should decide on their own. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that entanglement aspect to this case.
Yeah, there was a number of aspects of entanglement that were actually brought up during orals. And one of the primary ones was, what if the church decides not to be a church anymore? What if the church decides to sell its property? Now the government has to approve that change in use. So the government would have to approve the change to the structure of the building if they wanted to expand, or that they wanted to change the character of an aspect that's now under historic preservation, where there is effectively a grant of access to a particular facility, and that grant isn't in perpetuity. In Tilton v. Richardson, they had the issue in the case, even though the churches won, was that they had a 20-year grant on access to those facilities. And they said the 20 years, the limitation there is the issue, because then they can use it for whatever they want to, and that they had to have an in perpetuity use of that facility for secular purposes. And frankly, there's nothing more, integral to the mission of a church than the actual church itself, which is the thing that they're actually repairing, in these cases.
So we're going to talk about the Supreme Court appeal in a second, but one thing that also was central to the case is these churches in their grant applications, when they were going to the county and saying, give us this money, they were saying things like, if you don't give this to us, we won't be able to continue to worship. If you don't give us this, we can't continue to spread the gospel, and things like that. And that actually was something that we brought into every single thing we submitted to the court and an oral argument. It became very central because it showed exactly what you were talking about. You were funding their religious worship.
It was very interesting how obvious they were in their intent for use of the funds. I mean, ignore the fact that the county's intent was, marginally good and wanting to preserve buildings for the benefit of the public. I mean, sure, there's merit in all of that. But that the churches were saying point blank, we want to use this for worship, and actually wrote a software program to go through the 2,000 or 3,000 pages worth of documents looking for key phrases like that, and it turned up a lot. It was certainly a lot easier than reading all of them, but yeah, it turned up more frequently than I thought it would. You would think that they would be more opaque in their intent.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation has tried to educate some of the other counties to make sure that they're not doing this particular type of program. I mean, have you seen any impact so far from your case around the state?
I did follow up with the director of the program in Morris County and said specifically, are you guys following the order? And he responded back. He said, yep, there have been no more, grants for religious institutions. So at least in Morris County, I've been following up, making sure that they're abiding by, the law, which they should have been since 2003, but that's another story. And then, I think there's merit in following up with other counties where we know there are large, religious bodies and large religious institutions to make sure that they're also following up.
You've prevailed unanimously at the New Jersey Supreme Court. As I understand it, the churches are now appealing or seeking a petition for cert from the U.S. Supreme Court. And, they're certainly making this religious liberty argument, but on the flip side. And what's interesting about a case like this is, New Jersey is the arbiter of its own constitution. So that's a settled law now that the New Jersey Constitution prohibits this type of funding. The only question remaining, at least what the question they're trying to get the Supreme Court to answer, is whether there's some religious liberty interest on their side. So I don't know if you've read the briefing, if you have, your thoughts to share on that position.
They sorely distort the language in the Trinity case out of Missouri, obviously to their benefit. If you read the language, I think it's very clear that we fall outside the scope of Trinity. I mean, they were, talking about surfacing materials for playground, and here we're talking about the actual church building itself. So it's quite different.
Ensuring that they can continue to worship, as they pointed out in their which you didn't have with a playground.
Right.
So.
Yeah, they weren't trying to indoctrinate. Well, they probably were trying to indoctrinate, preschoolers, but the surfacing material wasn't really effective in that regard.
We've been fortunate enough to work with some great attorneys, and probably the most prominent and best is going to be on your side on this case. Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean of the Berkeley Law School and a constitutional law author and just well-regarded figure, is going to be handling the petition on your side, which I think will still be filed relatively soon in opposition to cert. So it seems like you have some good firepower now to counterbalance what the churches have.
I think so. I mean, I think we always had some good firepower coming from you guys at the FFRF. It's been great working with all of you and continuing to work with all of you. But you're right. I think it's a hard argument to make. I think people intrinsically believe in a concept of fairness and equity in all things, and often don't see the distinction that puts religious institutions outside of that equitable arrangement where all people get access to funds. So it's definitely a difficult argument to make, and I'm glad we have someone like Erwin on our side.
I think you mentioned earlier you've been an atheist since you were 8 years old. Did I hear that right?
Religion and religious institutions and religious scholars just didn't provide any sort of answers that I was looking for. The tough questions of why are we here and how did we get here and why are there stars and why are there planets and all those things that I think curious children find interesting about the world and want to learn more about. The fact that there really wasn't an answer there.
And so it's well known that you're an atheist and you're challenging your community. It's been a number of years. It sounds like you've lost at least one friendship. I mean, is it all worth it? I mean, you're protecting state-church separation, but you've suffered some losses through this process. Would you say it's worth it? What would you say to somebody else considering this type of work?
In the moment, they seemed like losses. In the grand scheme of things, if you're losing friends over disagreements, they're really not friends to begin with. And so, on the grand scheme of things, I've made much better friends as a result of this case, and have made stronger relationships with people because people in our community, they'd come up to me and they'd hear about the case, and we end up chatting about it, and it's just it's fun to hang out with like-minded people that you don't have to be half-closeted with.
David Steketee, Freethinker of the Year, thank you for standing up for the New Jersey Constitution. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Free Thought Matters.
Because free thought matters.